And well, hi, we are live. My name's Chuck Pearson from Greenville, Tennessee, talking over Virtually Connecting. We're altc in Liverpool, United Kingdom, and we have a couple of friends that we're going to toss to right now. Sheila McNeil, take it away for us.
Oh, hi everyone. I'm just turning around. So I'm Sheila, really glad to be here, but I'm not the main deal. Got a dream team of people here. Can't tell you how excited I am about this. So I'm just going to pass over to Helen, and then round the room we'll all say hello.
Hi, Helen Beetham. I'm a new learning consultant in the UK.
I'm Anna Page. I work at the Open University. I'm Sue Becking from Sheffield University.
I'm Lonnie Stewart from Canada.
And I'm Donna Lanclos from North Carolina.
Thank y'all very much. It's good to hear from y'all. We're going to go ahead and introduce the virtuals right now, and we are going to start with our Queen, Autumn Keynes.
Oh, don't say that. Queen. Hi, my name is Autumn Keynes, and I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I'm also a co-director of Virtually Connecting. Thanks, guys. It's great to be here. Really excited.
We go to Christian.
Well, hi, everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Christian Friedrich. I'm from Hamburg in Germany, and I work with Lifana Digital School and as freelance consultant at times.
Christian. Risa.
My name is, Parisa, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Parisa.
It seems that my internet connection is not really good. My name is Parisa. I'm from Iran, and nice to meet you.
Good to see you. We're patient with internet connections. I know that live. Risa.
My name is Clarissa Sorensen Unruh, and I am in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I teach at the Central New Mexico Community College.
Thank you very much.
And at UNM.
Yes. Jeff.
Whoa, that landed on me straight away. Okay, hi. Yeah, I'm Jeff Lewis. I'm in Cardiff in rainy Wales, and I may just sort of be on the fringe of this digital bit, just more of healthcare, but certainly dabbled in digital a lot. So looking forward to what you've got to say, really.
Outstanding. Tanya.
I'm Tanya Dory-Elias, and I'm in Kamloops, British Columbia at 3 a.m., so I'm only half here.
Shout out to our Western friends in the United States and Canada. Teresa finishes us off.
I hope not literally.
Not literally.
Teresa McKinnon. I'm in the Midlands in the UK, where it's also raining, and I'm at Warwick Language on Twitter. Pleased to be joining altc virtually this year.
Thank you all so much. It's good to be here with you. So let's go on site. Apparently Bonnie just gave a keynote. The keynote was amazing, even though I know nothing about it. Everybody tell us how Bonnie's keynote was amazing.
Everybody needs a Chuck in their life.
Yeah. It has been recorded, and it's probably on the internet already on YouTube if you want to catch up. I'm sure people are tweeting out it. But it was amazing. And it was about the new normal. And I think Bonnie really set up the conference for a lot of discussions about what we take as normal, how we change things, and how, most importantly, I think how we, in education, how we challenge things and how we take back control of normal. But I'm going to pass over to other people to talk about it.
Well, it was great for me to hear one kind of challenging some of the assumptions we make about the networks in which we practice openly and in which we think we're being challenging, to talk about how some of those networks are compromised, that kind of signs of existing power and status travel through those networks, and also how some of those networks are compromised, how they're owned and managed. And I think that was a really great corrective to some of the discourse about challenge and innovation that we hear in our field.
So
one of the things that occurred to me when Bon was talking, though, about the sort of constraints of open, right? Because we're doing it in these corporate platforms, we don't have any control. And my question, and I believe I put it on Twitter, was when have we ever operated in an environment that didn't have constraints, right? So maybe the nature of the constraints are very particular, but the fact of constraints is not new. We've always had to kludge our way through with our practice the things that aren't perfect. I mean, your cyborg thing in part is about, and then they do things anyway, right? So the heritage of these spaces is troubled, yes, but we have them in some way. So what do we do with them? Sometimes we leave them because they don't serve us, but if they're serving us.
So I will start by saying it was intended to be, in some ways, a kind of difficult keynote. Not because I actually like to be difficult, because there's a part of me that thinks I like to be difficult, but really in the end I kind of just, you know.
You're Canadian.
I'm Canadian. I'm sorry I was difficult. But I like, particularly when you have the privilege of starting off a conference, I like to start with a provocation. And so it was very much meant to be a provocation building on one of the terms in the theme of the conference, which was sort of the new normal. And I like the idea that learning technologies are no longer necessarily, you know, a novelty in higher ed. And yet I recognize there's really disproportionate and different ways in which they are used, particularly across status in higher ed. And I was speaking mostly about higher ed, but that exists very much in K-12 and in further ed or community colleges, at least in the North American context. We see a great deal of the same challenges across the work that my partner and I do. And his is in K-12 and mine is in higher ed. But with that provocation, the one thing that I would say around the constraints piece, we're always working against and with the narratives and figures that we have inherited from the types of things that we do. And so I wanted to put out the figure of the bell curve and then replace it with the cyborg, with Donna Haraway's cyborg from 1985. But we also have narratives around open practice that sometimes have been, and my experience of open practice has been amazing. I mean, four of the people in this room I'm meeting for the first time. Donna I met for the first time on Sunday, but we've known each other for years and relatively well and intimately. And I know your work and I know your thoughts, and I have some sense, I may not have any clue what your actual job is. But in some ways that's kind of freeing, right? Because I actually don't know always people's real life status signals. Right. I have a different kind of piece that goes with that. So there is real value in that open work, and yet the constraints are different, because at least in the academy, for those who are inside, and I'm not really, I'm sort of marginal, but there is that concept of shared governance that I certainly do not have shared governance with Twitter, right? And there is not even any lip service paid to shared governance with a space like Twitter. They have, you know, actively been ignoring a lot of their core users, active users' feedback for the past number of years. And so it is a slightly different piece. And what I wanted to do was just put out a model to think about as we go forward, because I find that so many of the things that we do are becoming buzzwords, like change, like innovation, and disruption. And oh God, disruption.
They're empty ones.
Yes,
and you also mentioned
empowerment
as well.
Empowerment, which, and we'll be talking in the LTHE chat about empowerment. Thank you so much for the coffee. Bless your heart.
Coffee delivery.
I'm gonna stop coughing. But yeah, you know, empowerment is a wonderful thing, but it can also become something that is just deployed. And I wanted to think about the cyborg as this messy, partial, illegitimate, marginal figure that comes from all of these things that I don't support, and yet is able to subvert those things, to exist in spite of those things and thrive.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Bonnie. I think that's, I think for those of us who work in learning technology and educational development, I think we always have that kind of role. I mean, I certainly feel that quite often, and this is not just about, I think, the imposter syndrome that many of us feel like, but I don't have a particularly strong academic background. I'm, you know, and I'm always aware of that.
Now I know.
I'm a complete fraud here. I just don't know what to know. But I have been able to find a space, and maybe I've been given fantastic opportunities. Part of it through networks, part of it just because I was willing to have a go at doing things as well. And that kind of empowerment that I was able to benefit from, I see other people maybe not having those same chances. I mean, I think things evolve, and I think, you know, I think it's
become a little more closed.
So we need to be
mainstream.
So we need to be pushing forward, and we do need to be thinking about things. But it is difficult, and I think as well you get to a point now, and I think this is maybe just a state of the world where we're in, that there are so many things now that actually I think people are closed. I know that I have closed down quite a bit over the past year. Basically because I don't know what to say quite a lot of the time, because I'm in a continuous state of WTF. You know?
I think we all are. But is there a sense in which this technology that's individually potentially subversive of existing prestige and power structures and individually empowering, which we all celebrate and we all take and benefit from, some of the kind of institutional effects that you started to talk about are more troubling in terms of, you know, you're saying there's no governance. I mean, when we see academic institutions being challenged and disrupted and broken down, we have to ask from what direction that's happening. Absolutely. The vision 20 years ago, as we all know, was of individual empowerment, students being able to move across institutions, being able to find knowledge where they wanted it, join networks, whereas actually what's happening, not solely because of the technology, because of all sorts of other forces, is that, you know, some of the good things for academic institutions, which are their capacity to democratize access, for example, in a very highly governed way, are being lost to some kind of anarchy of the market, if you like.
This is Tressie McMillan-Cottom's critique of lower ed, and one of the most important, if you guys haven't read it yet, y'all need to read it, because one of the most important pieces is she's not just calling it out in for-profit institutions. She's saying the valorization of the individual in education across the board is a huge part of the problem, that we have reduced education to a commodity in engaging in these sorts of narratives. And so what Bon's pointing to with the breakdown of institutions, Tressie does a magnificent job of laying that out sort of across the sector and saying it's actually a deliberate dismantling of these institutions, in part because when you widen access and when you democratize, the people who currently have power have less of it. So the reification and the shoring up of problematic power structures, that's not going to go away because we connect with each other on Twitter. Nope. And we still have spaces to connect and do some of the work, right? So that tension between how do we break down structures that are a problem, and then how do we make a space for ourselves that we would not otherwise have.
And how do we own some of those structures as well is part of what I was trying to get at. And again, like I part of it is cold medication, and part of it is just, I'm still trying to work my way through some of these thoughts, but I am genuinely concerned and interested in how do we own the implications of what we have invited into our right? And not that it's just the vampire at the window and it's all the fault of, you know, digital. We have many, many factors of change and collapse and challenges to institutions, which is where I use the Trump image. And that is affecting, like you say, how many of us even personally use spaces like Twitter, because I can only handle so much outrage and sensationalism, and that steady diet becomes almost impossible to engage with, and yet sometimes there's the need to bear witness. But beyond that individual piece, structurally, what do we do with this? How do we go about doing whatever it is that we do in digital education in ways that are for the good? To use a much too simple term, but really, you know, that's what I'm interested in right now.
So let me follow on with what Donna and Bonnie are saying. We're talking about how our institutions are being torn down. That this is a thing that is happening across higher ed, obviously, but across that. What comes to take its place? What can we do practically? I might be shouting out Bonnie here, I don't know. But what can we do practically to bring things into position that we can build from the grassroots to take the stand of institutions?
I'm really wary of trying to replace institutions, actually. Like, I think that, and again, I have an undergraduate degree, barely used, in political science. I'm not speaking from that background right now, so like I understand that the concept of the institution is a complex concept, and the concept of the social contract is a complex concept. But to me, in shorthand, an institution is a social contract broadly for some semblance of the public good, often partially defined, often is still excluding and gatekeeping other people, but nonetheless, that idea that there is some way to preserve some shared concept of democratically, this is what we would like to see. That to me is what institutions are good for, at least. And I don't think that we can do that I have seen with purely, in the long term, purely grassroots or participatory means, particularly around education. So I have my own project, which I didn't talk about in depth for time, but like my Anaganish 2 project is an effort to bring people together across networks and then work in institutions and sort of have these 3 layers connecting the network with the institution and with the community. And, you know, that's a great idea. It still needs, I really need an institutional home to make that work. It needs grant funding. It needs all of these things, right? Everybody only can do so much for free, for cycles.
But it's also not as if power doesn't operate in self-organized networks. It's just less visible. Sometimes harder to confront and see, you know, than in highly organized institutions.
None of that goes away.
Can I actually just bring in Stewart at this point? Because I think, Stewart, you're one person here. You just do all this stuff. You know, you do fantastic things in your teaching, you share that. You've done LTC chat, you've done, you know, bring your own device, but you have worked within and out with these structures. And I think you and your partner, Chrissy, you know, there's amazing things that you do. Do you want to maybe share how you managed to do that?
Because again, it comes back to first using Twitter, and it's like, oh my gosh, what we're going to, you know, tweet about here, and you know, follow Stephen Fry, where do we go next? And then started following people in the US, and Laura Pasquini is one of the key persons, and there are
Shout out.
there are many others, and seeing how they actually use social media. And then I actually had the opportunity to go out to South by Southwest and met some more people, went out, and that's where I met Laura there. So I've observed people and listened in. So I call it positive silent participation or engagement rather than lurking. And then, so oh God, people are sharing their work, putting things on SlideShare. This Creative Commons license came into the forefront, and I guess it kind of snowballed from looking at what other people were doing and sharing it, and then empowering, in the sense that I would do workshops and lectures for students, lectures for academics, to help them understand how they could use social media. And that's something I still continue to do now, because people don't get it necessarily. So you have to keep going back to the baseline and saying, this is what you can get out of it. So this concept of informal learning is just absolutely amazing, because, you know, I'm learning every single day. And I would say that, you know, the iPhone changed my life, because I travel on public transport and I'm learning something. Serendipity plays a great part. I don't know what I'm learning today. I'm not necessarily looking for anything, but you'll happen upon a tweet, or it might be less so on LinkedIn, sometimes on Facebook. So I've been very passionate about sharing this experience, because it's made a huge difference to my life, my career, my ambitions, and aspirations, really.
But your passion and energy are beyond doubt. But since we're talking about organisations, have you had to carve out space in your role in your organisation to allow you to share as much?
I'm full-time lecturer, so this is all.
It's all in your own time.
Yeah, and so I think. frontier is institutional change, right? So there's lots of individual practices that have been changed, but if at the same time that we want to change institutions, other forces are trying to tear them down, right? So to Chuck's question and to the point that Bonnie was making, the solution is to shore up and support the institutions that are social good institutions. So we don't need to invent something else. This is the library that gets shut down, and then the council tweets, well, what should we do with this building that would be a public good? And everybody says you should make it a library.
See, it's just for me, social media and the various different channels that we could use has kind of replaced the smoke room. Like, smoking's been banned for a long time. I don't smoke, but then there was the smoke room, so you missed out, because I wouldn't go in there because it's smelly.
Right. Yeah.
But you missed out on those conversations and the chit chat face to face. So because institutions typically are quite large, and certainly my mind is spread on various different campuses across the city, there is the potential to have these conversations, but we're just not there yet. And I don't know what the blockages is, because people do want to talk to each other and share ideas and bring up, this is my problem, this is the issue, how can we overcome this, which you would do face to face. And I think that's primarily because it is so open and people are afraid to lay themselves open and share too much, which is quite right. You don't want to be sharing things that are in confidence, which, if there was just us here in this closed room.
If it really was a smoking room.
Right, we could do that. You'd know who you could trust and would go further. So there's yet to be a space where you almost go into shared rooms with us.
Just to build on your analogy, I was a smoker, but very much a social smoker years ago, particularly a nighttime smoker. I didn't smoke in the day, but I loved the capacity to go to like a conference and meet people and have those closed, sort of intimate conversations easily because you were in that cordoned off space. But I know that I remember when I first started smoking, I felt ridiculous. And I think people feel like that when they first, and I should have felt ridiculous. Smoking is bad, kids, don't do it. But when people first go on Twitter, they often feel that self-conscious, it's identity stuff. People have absorbed images and impressions of what doing X means. And if that's not them, I wanted to be, a cool smoker like in the movies or whatever, but if someone has an image of being in a social media space as sort of, then they're going to feel awkward going there, right? Or they're going to feel like an outsider, even if the space is relatively open. I just want to turn back to the folks who, bless you, got up at 3 in the morning. Yeah. Or 4 in the morning or 5. My body still thinks it's about 7:30 in the morning, and I've already had like a full day. So, what about for you? What are your experiences with your institutions? Where do you think, really my question is, where do we go next, right? How do we go forward? A lot of us have these practices individually. How do we try to do something beyond just our individual networks and even classrooms with higher ed? How do we put some push to make change for good in education broadly, whatever it is?
Open to the floor.
That's an easy question to answer. Hang on, let me get my list. I could come at it from a personal perspective, in as much as what I've tried to do through the Open Ed SIG is to connect some of the dots. So when we talk about open practice, we recognize how people who are perhaps not part of the open community are already engaged in some form of open practice. And we help extend their feeling of belonging by reaching out and saying, do you know what you're doing is actually open practice, and that's really helpful and we appreciate it. So just to sort of start this network connections building and increasing, I'd have to say, for people who are watching maybe and aren't familiar with altc, that alt has been one of the great multipliers, if you like, of these sort of networks, and has been very forward thinking in actually speaking up for open practice and demonstrating what it looks like, and helping networks like altc chat that Sue's very involved in, and the various sort of manifestations of open practice that exist out there to be amplified and to be visible. So for me, altc has been a key network in helping spread that word. But we've got Parissa here as well, and last week I was at the Eurocall 2017 conference, which is why I can't be at altc this year. Parissa had huge visa problems to actually attend Eurocall, and I only know Parissa through the virtually connecting, really. And when you see the huge things that people are overcoming, you see where the future of higher education and knowledge creation is coming from. The fact that we can actually overcome these structural borders, whether they are institutional or national or enforced by politicians, and we can still go on creating knowledge. And that's where the future of academia lies for me. I've said enough.
I'll toss over to Christian because he had something.
Yeah, and I'll try and make it quick. And I think that you can leverage open really well, even if your institution itself isn't really committed to any of the practices yet. And you can connect to communities and then try and build on a network on your own, and then try and leverage that for change within your institution from the outside, and then create this carrot moment where people within your institution want to join in what you are doing, and then try and be a part of that. And for me, communities like altc, like Virtually Connecting, but also like for me personally in the German realm, are really part of getting hold of that lever to a certain extent.
This reminds me of a session at OER 17 earlier that I found with Francis and Josie and Viv Roth and Kate Bowles, and we were talking about the things that brought us together. And it's kind of the notion of desire paths. And I think what we all do is we're creating digital desire paths out with institutional structures. And I think that's possibly what we need to try and do, that we have these institutional things, like we have building and we have their technology, but we have other things. So what are the paths? How are we finding our ways, and how are we connecting? And actually to get those empowering institutions to actually relax a little bit about finding the next innovative learning space and spending millions, and actually let's just take a breath, take a step back and see what people are actually doing. Mm-hmm. There has to be some kind of formalization, or maybe some loose kind of boundaries, if you like, but we have a huge amount of permeability. So I think that's what we need to do, but that's really scary for leaders to do just now, because they're under continuing pressure. We've got TEF here, metrics. We've got metrics, we've got all these things. So like having someone saying, well, I'm just going to sit back and see what's happening these days, it's difficult, but actually I think that's what we need, is someone to actually be brave enough to do that. And it's how we can educate our senior management. I know that's a challenge for me, because our senior management are quite remote. They're very busy, they have lots of meetings. Mm-hmm. I don't get to go to those meetings. So I think it's how we break down and how we think about the kind of those stages. But I keep coming back to this kind of desire path. Yeah.
I wonder as well if in the sort of radical pedagogy tradition, where we would want students to critique the education we're offering them. I mean, I think an awful lot of what I do is really directed at teaching practitioners. And what I hope some of it does is actually invite teaching practitioners to challenge, undermine the narrative they're offered to fit themselves into for education technology at their institution, and find other ways to feel empowered to do that. And whether that's with theory, or whether that's with alternative networks such as the ones they make through you, or whether that's just through their own kind of subject knowledge and interrogating how the digital agenda appears to them from their own kind of subject home. I think there's a sort of equivalent to radical pedagogy, which might be radical ed tech, which actually doesn't just theorize among ourselves what the problems are, but hands over that activity, that theorizing, that questioning, and that kind of radical stance to the people we work with. And it's as difficult to do, but perhaps as necessary.
I also think that the solutions to some of the constraints in education can't come from within education. So again, to reference Tressie and her work, her solutions that she points to are political. So if we don't have enough money in the system, that's a political problem. If we don't have enough autonomy in our universities and our colleges and our schools, that's a political problem. So part of the situation that we're in now is because people who don't value institutions have gotten voted into office and they are breaking the institutions. So we cannot sit in our universities and hope to solve the problem from inside. And so we have a responsibility to go out from our universities and actually engage with the political systems that are a main driver of the context that we find ourselves in as practitioners. We can't passion our way out of the problems that we've got.
I think that keynote should have been a panel, and this was.
We're at 6:33 now. I want to make sure we respect the time of the people on site. How are we? Do we have time to keep talking a little bit? There are a couple of people here who wanted to jump in a bit.
There who got up, not to privilege the people who got up early, but
yeah, we will.
But if anybody there who got up early wants to say anything, I'll be here.
Clarissa, I think that goes to you.
Okay, so I was going to follow on this whole conversation as well and talk about using different kinds of institutions to also get people involved in social media practice. And particularly, I've been on a crusade for the last year to try to get the American Chemical Society in a place where they actually acknowledge that social media exists and that they should be using it and training their members to use it better and to get the word out and to be able to use it not only in their own professional development, but also with the thought that, as much as possible, let's get open access, let's get this kind of idea and start having you guys propagate this into industry and your classroom as much as we possibly can. And there's a lot of government work there too. So it is, I think we can leverage different institutions to also try and gain better access into the political spectrum and into our own institutions in terms of encouraging people to use social media and be open. That was what I was going to say. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Tanya, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, for me, open has always been about access, and maybe I'm just old-fashioned, and maybe I'm just old and grumpy. But it's always, and I feel like sometimes when we talk about open and social media, what we're talking about is making it better for the people who already have access to university. But to me, that's, I mean, a lot of times I feel like we're missing the point. For me, it's about the people who don't have access, the people who can't get to campus, the people, reasons that they can't. And it makes me sad that whenever we seem to miss not only giving education, but giving really good educational experiences to those folks. Because I don't know I mean, that's what brought me into this. And I feel like we lose that a lot. So sorry, it is early. Maybe I'll be happier later.
There's a lot to be grumpy about.
We don't want to end it on a grumpy note, do we?
You guys can keep talking.
Anything else from on site? Any other things you're looking forward to at altc?
Well, I suppose I should just mention that we will be continuing this conversation later this afternoon. So for some of you, it might be a better time during the day. But at 4 o'clock our time, we're having a tweet chat with LTHE and altc. So we're kind of going to extend these notions.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
I forgot. I'd never mentioned that. And it's on the Virtually Connecting page, so everybody can see that. But yes, that is happening. This 4 o'clock for y'all would be while I'm in class. So, but thank you.
But there's lots happening, and I think though that we have people here who need to get caffeine, so that's going to cheer everyone up. So there won't be a grumpy note here, but there's lots happening. So yeah, and of course we'll be back here tomorrow. Yeah, every day. Yeah, tomorrow and Thursday we've got other sessions as well. So.
Yes, indeed.
And I wanted to thank all of you for the conversation, because for me that was actually very rarely after a talk is there a whole lot of mental space to have a conversation. I really appreciated the continuation of the conversation. So thank you.
And thank you for facilitating that with your provocations, Bonnie. We really do appreciate you. And we appreciate all of you who are there. If nobody else has anything pressing, we'll go ahead and let the on-site go. And we can stay here and chat if all on-site disappears.
Take care, folks.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Get a little
Bye-bye.
post-game going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So yes, and anybody else, and we're just free forming now, still live, still broadcasting, but does anybody else have anything to follow on with the virtuals leaving us? Well, the on-site leaving us, we're virtuals.
They're kind of virtual too, though, you know.
Well,
they're virtual to us, right?
That's a good point. We're all virtual to somebody, aren't we?
Oh no.
hopefully we're all real to somebody.
We can go
Virtually
meta
nothing.
here really, really.
Yeah, this is
fast.
getting into a deeply philosophical conversation.
Just how real is real, anyway.
What is
So
real?
corrected.
Nothing's really real.
Oh my gosh, this is it's too early for this, guys.
We're
And
all
I
side
kept
work.
the broadcast going for this too.
We're all side work. And then the on-site left, and then everything went crazy. It was like holding up two mirrors to each other.
It's like, oh no. The Battlestar Galactica references started. It's not good. Okay.
So institutions and providing education for people. Let's turn it grumpy again.
Don't get me started.
I know. I was like, wow, because in New Mexico, we literally have people who do not have internet access still. Mm-hmm. And this is my constant problem with OER, is I'm like, they prefer books. You have to print out said books. To print out the books actually sometimes costs more than, and getting like homework, whatever, costs more than everything else. So my problem often comes back to this fundamental issue of access, and can everyone get on the internet in the ways that we're hoping them to be able to, with the kinds of devices that actually can access what they need to be accessing. Mm-hmm. That's my constant, like, oh man, really? Because, in the middle of the Navajo reservation, there is not a Starbucks to go to where you can get free internet. So actually there is, but it's way far away for some people.
Mm-hmm. It is. And even East Tennessee, we still have little pockets here and there where that still remains, the access issue still remains. There have been tons of conversations about digital redlining, about rural internet access, that we still continue to fight. And you think the United States is all sorts of resource laden and ready to handle, well, resources for some.
Yeah.
Well, and then some of the solutions that we see, to free internet and giving free internet, and actually just end up being predatory. Yeah. Larger companies trying to give free internet just so that they can track, just so that they can advertise, just so that they can, and then usually it's not even full internet, right? It's just, oh, we'll just give you the advertising for free.
Yeah.
And just really trying to be very predatory, especially on vulnerable populations that might be more inclined to certain messages because they have certain needs.
And I think, I think I see us feeding into a lot of that, right? Like when I started distance education, it came in a box, right? We didn't use internet. I mean, these things, not only are they possible, they were done, and they provided access to people. Our institution, we're moving away from print course delivery. And, I've talked a lot about, obviously not enough, about offline versions. Most people have access to internet sometimes, but why don't we create courses in a way where they can take them away, they can go offline, and then when they, even if it's sending a USB stick back, there's solutions to this stuff, but for reasons that, again, make me sad, that you know, we aren't talking about those kinds of things, or at least where I am, we're not talking about those kinds of things.
It's a real, yeah, it's a real call for activism, isn't it? And how important it is as individuals for us to take an active stance against that and out it. When we see more attention being paid, perhaps, as you say, by large companies to connecting people in Africa as a potential next new market, and our assumptions of the West all having access, we have to challenge these things, especially for marginalized individuals who don't have a voice often. That's a downer. Let's.
Well, but it's a downer, but it's.
Chuck said to get cranky, Teresa.
Yeah.
But we're talking about.
We've got to get crankier.
We're talking about the important work that needs to be done. Tanya's point is very, very well taken. Coming out of that is most of us got into this vocation to not just provide education to people who have every resource possible for themselves. We want to be doing this to actually provide social mobility for people who don't have those caliber resources, and yet we keep running against the roadblocks where resources continue to be allocated. And how do we get around? I hear Clarissa say, talk about how we have all these online tools for our chemistry education, and a lot of them are online, reserved. If you don't have internet access, you can't access them. There are ways to actually serve things and serve things with reasonably low bandwidth, and we can talk about how we can build solutions to that issue. But we have to be willing to say, oh yeah, OER company who's serving resources for free, it's not really free when your resources keep tons of bandwidth. How do we do this intelligently and serve all people rather than just do it free?
Yeah, and what I liked about the session with the onsite, while the onsite folks were still there, was this question of how to push for that change, maybe, because we all got into this because we have a certain ideal or motive. And my experience is, and I've seen that with myself and with lots of others as well, that if you push for that change, if you try to trigger those conversations, it really helps to have this network and community that you can point to, and the work of others that you can point to, so that it doesn't become doesn't stay your individual quirky issue, and you're not the only one posing those questions within your university or your institution, but others are doing the same as well. But it really helps to have that kind of network, because it can be quite tiring to keep on running into that wall.
Autumn, what are you thinking?
Yeah, you saw it on my face, didn't you?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about this idea of working within constraints, and the idea that a lot of these networks that we've built, quite honestly, are very privileged, right? We're able to do, I mean, even virtually connecting, right? Virtually connecting takes a ton of bandwidth, and we've got some people who are on the line right now who are turning off video, who are turning down bandwidth because they're having issues, you know, with that particular pathway. So we're using incredibly privileged spaces to build these communities, but then how do we flip that around when we want to serve communities that are not as privileged? And would it be interesting to purposefully impose specific constraints on ourselves just to play in an area of constraint, right? So the thing that came up about constraints that I find interesting is that I think a lot, I shouldn't say I think a lot, because it's just like a reoccurring thing. So I think often about the idea of creativity within constraints. So something like Twitter, for instance, I think Twitter it gets so much out there because you have such a limited space, right? And so you have to think about, how am I going to fit what I want to say in this limited amount of space? And even if I do have to use more space, if I have to do 2 or 3 tweets, how do I connect them to one another? And how do I connect these ideas to other people's ideas in this small space? So what if we more often put ourselves in situations where we said, okay, we're going to do this, and we're only going to connect to high-speed internet, like, you know, this whole project's going to be like a 2-week project. We're going to only say that we're going to get 3 hours of high-speed bandwidth within this, you know, 2-week period to communicate with each other over this period of time. I don't know. It's kind of abstract, but I was just thinking about Tanya's idea of, like, the idea of either downloading information and then going offline with it, or like sending USB sticks or something like that, like forcing ourselves into a constraint just to try to force that creativity, or at least to force empathy, right? To at least understand that point of view. I don't know. That's what I was thinking.
We actually do that a lot.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, Christian.
I know,
But yeah.
it's just, I don't even have a finished thought here, but what I'm completely with you, Autumn, in terms of constraints and creativity, and if you have all the resources at hand, there's no need to be creative and no need to think of those last 5% maybe, or something like that. But also what it endangers us, I think, is to fall for solutions that are posed by those who usually pose that narrative. And that is what you usually hear from, like, the typical Silicon Valley ad tech, or not even ad tech company. We're so lean, we're so creative, we have posed constraints to this and that, and your system is all bloated, and we are going to disrupt this now because we are creative, because of our constraints. We bootstrapped our business with our Harvard Law degree or whatever it is. And, you know, I think I'm completely with you, because I know, as on a subtext, I know what you mean when you speak of constraints and creativity, and you don't mean that. No. But it's almost like this vocabulary has been taken over by that narrative. You see what I mean? And it's not a finished thought yet. I'm not trying to, like, maybe
no, that's a good point, and I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. Maybe I don't spend enough time, you know, listening to that perspective, because even sometimes I find myself vulnerable to it.
Yeah, I think asking the communities first is kind of one of the most fundamental, important things to do, because they'll tell you what they need and what they want. And when I said, like, the Navajo Nation, that was from a conversation 3 or 4 years ago with a group of students that I had who were from the Navajo Nation, who were like, this is ridiculous. You can't require OpenStacks. But I haven't had that conversation since. So that nation might actually have access now, and I might be talking about some other nation that doesn't. I mean, it just depends on where it is on the spectrum. And I think that also shows something. Like, I checked in with the disadvantaged groups at some point, or maybe less advantaged, maybe is the better way to put that. But I didn't recheck, right? I haven't gone back and said, hey, what do you guys need now? And so it's almost this constant dialogue of, I need to constantly say, okay, what's happening with you? That's kind of my sense of the importance, not only checking once, but checking constantly.
Well, it's about developing relationships, right?
Right.
And it's not about being a savior, going in and saying, well, we fixed the problem, hooray!
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. Just trying to get a sense of what they need.
Yeah, well, and just
where
like
they are.
Creating those relationships. And so
where we can fit that in.
Naturally go back, because those are your friends, right?
Right.
Those are the people that you care about. So of course you'd go back and say, hey, how are things going?
Right.
Well, we are starting to push time. Any final thoughts before we go ahead and shut off the live broadcast?
Thanks, everyone.
I wanted to try to keep this going because I saw some stirrings of conversation, and of course they leave on site and we get some really, really good thoughts. To those, Jeff and Teresa, and those who left before, thank you for being here with us. To the five of you, thanks for investing your time this day, morning, whatever. It's very valuable, and we sure appreciate it. We're shutting down a broadcast now, from Greenville, Tennessee. So long.